Haunted Apartment, Miss K is a 2024 Indonesian horror movie. Now this is actually a sequel from a 2023 movie in the West, probably best known as The Haunted Hotel. I'm not going to try and pronounce the Indonesian titles for these, but yes, it is actually a sequel. Or is it? We will discuss. So what is the story of The Haunted Apartment, Miss K? It focuses primarily on two sisters, one of which, the older, gets a job in a new town as a manager of an apartment complex. Now, I'm not quite sure if this is meant to be like a hotel or if it's just like a kind of manager of a residential apartment. It's not exactly clear. But she is there, and her younger sister is kind of still going to high school or what have you. And this apartment has the apartment building has a floor which is inaccessible, floor 6, and she's told that the floor is inaccessible because it's damaged and it's beyond repair. But the residents of the floor below complain that there is water dripping from the ceiling, and you know, inevitably she goes to investigate this kind of floor above to find it, you know, desecrated. It seems to be in very poor condition, but one of the rooms appears to be haunted by not one but two ghosts, the ghosts of a mother and daughter apparently. And once she enters this kind of apartment, she is cursed to die in 4 days, and until those 4 days come to its conclusion, she will be harassed by kind of spirits. So think of it very much like The Ring. Now she must try and find the reason about why these kind of ghosts are doing this, as other people end up getting cursed as well. What will happen? You'll have to watch the film and find out. So, is this a sequel or is it a remake? Now, to me, it's very much a remake. I watched this movie having seen The Haunted Hotel, and I began thinking, have I actually seen this movie? Am I re-watching a film that I've already seen and reviewed? So I double checked, and it's like, no, like, this is a new film, but it is exactly the same plot as the movie before it, which only came out the year before this one. So this seems like a very bizarre choice to me. Clearly you don't need to watch the first movie because it's exactly the same. There's a few minor differences, but ostensibly it's the same film, the same plot, the same setup. So, and both of them obviously appear to be very much influenced by the Ring films. I don't really understand why this is a remake, because the original actually kind of finished with the ghosts sort of still active. So who knows the reason for this. Now this is apparently based on a real haunted apartment in Indonesia somewhere. Are there any differences? Well, let me give you an idea here. So in the original, the haunted floor is the 3rd floor. Here it's the 6th floor. In the original, you get 3 days until the curse comes to its end. Here you get 4 days. And the original curse, I think you end up kind of dying at midnight. Here you die at 6 p.m. So there is a lot of, you know, vast differences in these two movies. I suppose the main difference really is the fact that there are, in this one, 2 ghosts, a mother and daughter, but it's not as if it really has much of a difference because they only ever appear together at the same time anyway, so it's not as if like one ghost is doing something and the other ghost is doing something else. You know, it's the same kind of thing. We even have 2 sisters that are kind of our main protagonists, with the older sister having a love interest, and we even get the kind of the extended sequence really about them doing this investigation to try and find out, you know, the origin of this entity, or entities in this case, and try and figure out a way to stop them with a kind of a wizened old psychic guy. So it's the same film, it really is. And it's a year apart. I do not understand the logic of this. But, you know, should you watch it, what works in this film? So, I mean, it's a good production value. They've chosen to shoot on a, from the looks of it, to be a real kind of hotel, at least in some of these kind of shots, to give it some sort of authenticity. So it kind of looks like it's, you know, filmed in a legitimate, or at least probably the non-scary elements anyway, in a legitimate kind of like hotel. I think the kind of the set design when we go into this kind of 6th floor, where it's all sorts of, as I say, a dilapidated old spooky looking situation going on, looks pretty good. I would say one thing that this movie maybe does a little better is the actual ghosts look a bit better. The ghosts in the original looked a bit hokey, I will say. Here they kind of look a little bit more threatening. They do kind of look more like the ghosts from like The Grudge or Ring, to be honest with you. I think the idea of the original movie was to try and move away from that, but it ended up looking kind of goofy. Here they look more threatening, but they kind of look much like typical Asian ghosts, if you see what I mean, that we've seen in movies. There are there's a pretty gory deaths, I have to say, with bodies getting kind of ripped apart, and they've achieved this through a mix of practical and kind of CGI. And whilst the CGI isn't the best, I think it's still, you know, it's still some sort of fairly over the top sequences with some pretty painful kind of looking deaths where these ghosts basically rip you apart. And the kind of the story about how these ghosts came to be and their circumstances of why they're doing this. You know, we get some exploration of that. Again, it's kind of the same as more or less as the original movie, but it's an interesting kind of mystery to a degree. I think the acting is, for at least our main characters, is fairly sort of strong. Again, it's sometimes difficult to judge foreign language movies because obviously I'm reading the subtitles rather than hearing the subtleties of someone's performance in the verbal sort of sections. But you know, they seemed okay, at least in the kind of the main character department, which would lead me to be onto what doesn't work. And I'll stick it with the acting. There are some smaller characters here, even though they were speaking in a non-English language. I found the characters to be a little hokey. The psychic character that we get kind of introduced halfway through the movie, super kind of a cheesy character and very much over the top and quite silly. It's not a big role, but we also have the owners of the hotel or apartment building who are acting like so suspicious, like, I wonder who, you know, I wonder what they could be hiding. And it's just like, man, their acting is so goofy, it's just so obvious that they're hiding something. And let's talk about that, really, without kind of spelling it out. I mean, like, the plot here is, as I say, it's the same plot. It is the same plot with a few sort of tweaks and kind of minor changes, but essentially it's the same film over and again, which would lead me to ask why, for a start. But the actual, if you just ignore the first one, and if you haven't seen the first one, then maybe watch this one, because I would say the effects are a little better here. But like when our characters, and one of them is a policeman, the boyfriend is a policeman, so you would expect him to be somewhat competent in investigating, but like it's so clearly obvious that there are characters here hiding stuff, and the way they are acting and just in their dialogue, the way it's written, and they're like seemingly like have no knowledge of stuff which has happened to them, is just like, come on, there's so many plot holes here. It's just silly, to be honest. I mean, the actual story itself is not a bad story, I would say, but it's just not very refined. It's very sort of basic with like characters here who are clearly have reveals that will happen later on down the line, or are hiding things, acting so suspicious. Even though kind of the most idiotic of investigations would be able to somewhat question what's going on there, particularly in a point in a movie where they clearly caught them in a lie. So that's all a little bit sort of like silly, I have to say. The actual scares themselves, the actual horror sequences, we get quite a lot in the first, I would say, third of the movie, the first act. And then we have a long period where we don't really see our ghosts. And it ends up becoming more of a drama about what has happened to the human characters that would eventually kind of become these ghosts. And you almost forget in a way that you're watching a kind of a horror film. And even the finale, I would say, it doesn't really have as good a sort of payoff scenes as the kind of the sequences early on in the movie, where I feel those sequences are certainly the strongest, and the kind of the most kind of like graphic in regards to violence or kills or gore sequences and things like that. So I think it needed to have a little bit more of the ghost sort of doing stuff. There are sequences here that look a bit goofy in regards to the kind of the ghost. There's a sequence by a swimming pool, and I understand what they are trying to do, and it does tie into kind of Indonesian culture. But at the end of the day, there's a sequence here that I think looks a little bit silly, especially to us in the West, I would suggest. The VFX don't quite work in that scene as well as I think it could have done. Overall, it's a watchable horror film. I think if you have seen the first movie, you don't need to watch this one because it doesn't really offer anything substantially new. But if you haven't seen the original, then maybe watch this one. As I say, I think the effects in large are probably better, even though I think some of the elements of the story are not done as well. But it's very much more of the same. I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. It's okay. You know, it's nothing special. I've seen better movies coming out of Indonesia, but it's not a terrible film. It's watchable. It's an okay ghost story. I just wish they had done something different with it, considering this is only a year apart from the movie that it's just remade. Seems crazy to me. Anyway, 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.